We back in here. We're going to do a Chelsea Champions League preview as well as a match day 1 preview. Chelsea versus FC Bayern Munich away at the Allianz Arena. And to start with, I just wanted to say it's good to be back watching Chelsea in the Champions League. Of course, it's fitting that the first match back for the club is at the Allianz Arena, the site of where the club won its first Champions League, obviously, in 2012. Not to mention there's some extra spice added to this matchup, considering the fact that Nico Jackson is on loan at Bayern Munich. And we'll get into him in a little bit. But to start with, I wanted to go with a match preview, and then I'll get into what I think may happen and what my hopes and expectations are for the club in this Champions League campaign. So to start with, we're going to start with some Bayern Munich team news. They've played 5 matches to start the season, and they've won all 5. 3 in the Bundesliga, 1 Super Cup, and 1 DFB Pokal match. And they've had a couple of big results in that, 6-0 at home to RB Leipzig, and then a 5-0 at home to Hamburg. They usually have a couple of these types of results every season, and they've had them this early already. And so it looks like they're off and running. In terms of their injury news, however, they will be without Jamal Musiala, who, as we saw in the Club World Cup, suffered a long-term injury against PSG and is not expected to be back until probably the new year or sometime after that. And then they also have Alphonso Davies, who was out long-term, along with Hiroki Ito as well. In addition, though, they're also going to be missing Raphael Guerrerio for this match. It looks like he suffered a knock of some sort. I don't really know what, but it limits their flexibility a little bit. He's able to play at left back and deputize in midfield, so it'll affect them a little bit, obviously. Now, getting into the Chelsea injury news, we saw a lot of rotation against Brentford, and the manager Enzo Maresca in his pre-match press conference mentioned that he'll be playing the best 11 available to him in this match, which is very good news. Hopefully that includes the likes of Cole Palmer, Estevao, and Marc Cucurella, one of Reece James, or Malo. We'll see. I'll get into that starting 11 in just a little bit. But I think the spiciest part of this matchup, I think that I should mention, is that Nico Jackson is back on loan. Is on loan at FC Bayern and is back facing up against his former club. Part of me wishes for that reason that this match was at Stamford Bridge, just because I'm curious as to what type of reception we'll see him get from the match-going supporters. I personally don't have any sort of animosity to him, obviously. He was kind of relegated to third-choice striker, and considering the fact that he was out and out the first choice in his first couple seasons at the club, I think he had every right to try and secure a move away. And hopefully it works out for him. Not in this match, obviously, but hopefully overall he gets his wish and establishes himself as the main man, whether at Bayern Munich in the next couple years, because that won't happen with Harry Kane there currently, or elsewhere. In terms of the match itself, though, I think Chelsea's best path to victory, if I had to say, is to not necessarily make it a basketball game type of match where it's just completely back and forth, because I do think Chelsea are vulnerable on the break, as we saw versus Brentford in the previous match. But I think if they can play more of a style like they did against PSG in the Club World Cup final, I think that bodes well for them. And to start with, I think getting into the starting 11, I guess I'll just start up top, because I think that's key to maximizing João Pedro at the number 9. His best match for the club was obviously in that final against PSG, in my opinion, where he's able to get into space and get involved and not have to drop deeper to collect the ball in order to involve himself in the game. Because, where I think the club has struggled, obviously, in the 2 draws to start the season against Palace and Brentford, is when a team not necessarily sits all the way back, but concedes possession and seeks to frustrate Chelsea in limiting the amount of chances that they create. And we've seen João Pedro, especially in this last matchup against Brentford, him starting as the number 9, but dropping deeper and deeper as the game wore on in order to try to involve himself. And in order to counteract that, you need to have runners from midfield trying to get him behind as a result. And to be fair to him, there was a lot of rotation in that Brentford match. Buonanotte is not a guy who's going to run in behind or make runs trying to get on the end of crosses. And Hato, who came in as a left back and inverted, he just wasn't comfortable doing that as well. He's more of an inverted fullback who kind of sits. And so as a result, that center of the pitch where you expect crosses to be put in or passes being played in behind, those just weren't available to look for because there just wasn't really anybody making those runs. And so I think hopefully having Cole Palmer back in behind João Pedro allows him to do that. It's clear that João Pedro's best position for the club, in my opinion at least, is as a number 10. I think it's the reason when Liam Delap got hurt a couple weeks ago, we saw Tyreek George come in and play striker, being that guy who kind of sacrifices himself as the number 9 to make those runs so that João Pedro can play his best position. And the same thing in the match versus Brentford, where Tyreek George is subbed in. He plays as a striker. Obviously, that didn't last the whole second half, but you get the idea. Into the rest of the starting 11, and this is kind of impacted by some of the injury and team news that we saw over the past week from players coming back from international break. If I had to say, I think Alejandro Garnacho is going to get his first start for the club on the left, with Cole Palmer as the 10 and Pedro Neto on the right-hand side. Now, Estevao is back in the squad, and so I think he'll make the bench, but considering the fact he didn't play at all, didn't make the squad in the last match, I just don't think he's at the point where he's going to come straight back into the starting 11. I think that'll probably be the case in the next month or two where he establishes himself, because I think he's ready to go right now. I just think it's a little bit about protecting him. And so that's why I have those players as the 3 in behind the striker. Now, if Estevao were to come into the starting 11, which is, if he was fully fit, I would like to see, then it would be Garnacho dropping to the bench and Pedro Neto on the left-hand side. But as I said, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. Now, for the midfielders, I think it picks itself. Moises Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez, obviously. With Lavia still not being fit, along with Badiashile as well at center half. And Dario Essugo being replaced in the Champions League squad with his injury. I just think that midfield picks itself. Andre Santos has made only substitute appearances. I think he'll get his opportunities to start moving forward. I just don't think this is the match for him to do so. In terms of the back 4, I think 3 of the back 4 picks itself. Marc Cucurella, Tosin Adarabioyo, Trevor Chalobah. And I'll save the right back for just a second. But the 2 center halves, we saw Wesley Fofana play and get 45 minutes against Brentford. I just don't think he's 100% fully fit yet, as that seems to always be the case with him at this point. But I think that center back duo of Trevor Chalobah and Tosin has served the team well to start the season. And I think that's what the manager is most comfortable with. So I would prefer that he play that center back duo. Now, At right back, I'm going to start Reece James. If it was Estevao as the right-sided winger, it would then be Malo. But I think in this preferred lineup with Pedro Neto being on the right-hand side, I think it's safe to have Reece James start at right back. It's weird, though, because Malo didn't see the pitch at all against Brentford. Now, I think that was partially due to tactically the second half chasing the game and Reece James not being a part of that starting lineup, starting at right back. So he had to choose one, and he just happened to choose Reece James. Part of it also could be that with Pedro Neto starting on the right-hand side, Enzo Maresca recognizes that in order to have somebody invert or maybe sit as one of the back three in possession, Reece James is just a better fit for that. And Malo is better off, bombing up and down the right-hand side, providing width. And so I just think for this matchup, Reece James is just more solid defensively away from home. And that's why I would start him as the right back. In goal, it picks itself at this point. Robert Sanchez hasn't had a goofball moment in a while. Has been solid to start the season. And as Enzo Maresca stated that he would start tomorrow. So that's my starting 11. In terms of what I think will happen in the game, my head is going to go with a 3-2 Bayern Munich victory. Now, optimistically, obviously, I want a Chelsea victory, and I would hope for like a 3-1 or something like that. But I think in this matchup, first, if I were a neutral, I would want to see a lot of chances on both sides. And a lot of chances hopefully means a lot of goals. And so I think there will be 5 total goals scored. And I would edge Bayern Munich in that, if only because they are gelling at a bit of a higher level than Chelsea are to start the season. Although Chelsea could very well go in there and steal all 3 points. Who knows? I think they definitely have the potential to. I'm just not sure that it'll happen from match day 1 in the Champions League. Now, the funniest outcome would be that if Nico Jackson were to get a goal or assist. Now, I'm going to predict that he does, if only because it'll be really funny. I'm going to hate it, especially if it turns out to be like the winner or something like that. But I think just for the plot, it should happen really. And I think he'll get a chance, especially against Chelsea's backline in transition. If in the second half, let's say Malo comes on for Reece James and, Chelsea become a little bit more suspect defensively. They're chasing the game, for example, or something like that. Nico Jackson gets on a breakaway. I think there's a solid chance that he'll get a couple chances to put them away. Now, as we've seen in a Chelsea shirt, that's not always guaranteed, or he's always favored to put those chances away. But I think he'll probably get an opportunity or two if he does see the pitch. So that's what I think will happen in this match. Now, in terms of Chelsea's Champions League campaign as a whole, my expectation is that they don't necessarily finish in the top 8 and get a first knockout round bye, so to speak, in which they bypass that round. I think they'll probably finish comfortably qualifying for that first knockout round. And I think a quarterfinal finish is a realistic and solid expectation for Chelsea in the return to the Champions League. I think the squad is really young. I've said before in previous videos that my reason for not being 100% optimistic about Chelsea both in the league and in the Champions League and the domestic cups is just a little bit of that inconsistency that comes with such a young squad. And so I think they'll struggle a little bit. Now, if I had to pick between the Premier League and the Champions League, which I think is more likely for Chelsea to win, I would pick the Champions League. I think there's more potential in a cup competition for Chelsea to go out and get the right matchups and exploit oppositions over two legs, or over one match in domestic cups, but we're leaving that out. But I think it's more likely that happens for Chelsea than a consistent 38-game season where they turn out performance after performance to keep up with the top of the English Premier League. So I do think it's more likely, if Chelsea were to win one of those competitions, it would be the Champions League. Although I think ultimately in both, they'll come up just a little bit short, unfortunately. Now, considering the fact that they did win the Club World Cup, and as supporters, we got a taste of that sort of success again on the world stage, and the European stage, of course, is on the world stage at this, with the Champions League. I think those players are hungry for more. They're not going to be afraid of any team going into the competition, considering they beat the best team from last season handedly in PSG in the Club World Cup final. So I think they have every chance to beat every team that they come up against when it comes to the knockout round. And hopefully, as a supporter, I get to see a third trophy lift in this competition. So, to recap, I think in this match specifically, match day 1 away to Bayern Munich, I think it's unfortunately a 3-2 loss, although I'm hoping for a 3-1 win. I think Nico Jackson gets the opportunity to get a goal contribution. I just don't know if it'll come off, and I think it'll be funny either way. And in terms of the overall campaign itself, I think Chelsea will finish as quarter finalists. Now, the one tweak to that prediction that I am going to make is, if they come up against an English side in the knockout rounds of the competition, I don't think they can in the first knockout round, but from the second knockout round, maybe in the quarterfinal or somewhere in that range, if they do come up against an English team, I will predict that they will beat them, if only because I want the bragging rights. But in any case, I'm going to leave it there. I will be back with a match review after the match, hopefully as immediate as possible. And if you've come across this video, I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next one.